All right, hello, my name is Madison Leonard, and I'm currently leading PLG product marketing at Vanta. And today we're going to talk about product-led growth and what it means for a PMM to not only get a seat at the table, but also to prove success. I've spent a lot of my career at PLG companies. I believe that PLG is the future of the way that businesses are going to sell and buy software, so I'm really excited to share my learnings with you today. Here's basically what we're going to cover. Not only am I going to give an intro on what PLG is and also what it isn't, but also going to decipher what it means to be a PMM in a PLG organization. And then once we cover those two things, how do we get a seat at the table, and then how do we prove success? Now, just out of curiosity, how many people are familiar with the concept of PLG? Raise your hands. Okay, about half. Cool. Does anyone want to give a shout as to what you think PLG means to a company? Anyone? Yeah, go ahead. Yes, I love it. My job is here, it's done. You can come up and take over for me. So PLG stands for product-led growth, and it's essentially just a fancy way of saying that the user gets to experience value from the platform on their own without talking to sales, like you mentioned. Now, I think that, like I said earlier, this is the future of all B2B selling and buying. We're already seeing this come to fruition. Figma was just acquired for $20 billion by Adobe. And I think there's one interesting point here that often gets overlooked. And if you leave with one thing here today, it would be this point. PLG is not just singularly owned by marketing or by product. It is a company-wide strategy. What I really love about PLG is that it essentially closes the gap between perceived value and experienced value. Perceived value is things like you're on a website and you're seeing screenshots of the product, you're also reading copy about it. It's also like the narrative that sales is telling in the sales cycle as well. Experience value, however, only comes once that person gets into the platform and starts using it on their own, hopefully getting to that aha moment and actually creating habitual patterns to come back to the product. Now, I think what's so unique about PLG is that you still have perceived value. You still have the marketing, that you have on the website or across social, that's the perceived value before they get into the product. But it really helps to bridge the gap. And in more traditional, sales-led growth motions that we know today in B2B buying, you only have perceived value. You only have what the sales reps are telling you. Maybe you get a demo in real time during that narrative process in the pipeline, but that experience value doesn't come until later. And so this is what I think is the unique selling point of PLG. I like to think about PLG as being kind of on a spectrum. And so this is very simplified. Again, the merge kind of happens between the two. With sales-led, though, with no PLG, like I said, you're in the sales cycle, you're not experiencing the product on your own, but maybe there's a demo that a sales rep does to kind of help you visualize it a little bit. Then there's something I like to call sneaky trial. I'm going to coin that term. And it basically means that sometimes when sales reps are up against a competitor, it's really tight, they don't know if they're going to win the deal, sometimes they'll add in a trial. And it's manually provisioned, it's not very scalable. Sometimes they'll sneak a potential customer into the trial and kind of let them feel out the product for their own. Again, not scalable, and it's not standard across the cycle. Then there's something called demo trial, which is essentially getting a demo on your website. It is not them creating an account, so it's not personalized to them, but it kind of helps walk them through what the product could look like for them once it's all set up. It's a great way to try to experience some of that value, but again, it's not necessarily unique or individualized to that person. And so that's where limited trial and our freemium and reverse trial come into play. Limited trial means that the user is able to create an account on their own and see value in real time. However, limited trials are limited by nature. They have a time cycle. Maybe it's 14 days, maybe it's 30 days, but they're kicked out, and unless they actually swipe their credit card, they don't get value anymore from the product. It has a decent conversion rate, don't get me wrong, but still a majority of people fall off. Then we have freemium and reverse trial. Freemium, we're all very familiar with today. There's a free product and it's free forever. You get into it, you can continue to use it for free on that base level. There are options to self-serve to an upgrade path, but it's mostly free. Reverse trial, I think, is the new wave of PLG, and it's basically combining freemium and limited trial together. With reverse trial, you basically come into the platform, you create an account, but instead of being kicked out of the platform altogether, you're just downgraded to the freemium account. This makes it really easy for people to continue to see value and upgrade when they want, and that's just adding to the word of mouth value that PLG has. So now let's talk about the difference between product-led growth companies and sales-led growth companies. From a product-led growth company, the mindset is really focused around the user experience and making sure that that value is delivered. Whereas the mindset for a sales-led company is more focused around revenue. Now, I do want to preface, I understand that all businesses are focused around revenue. Even for a PLG company, you need revenue to have a business. However, the path to revenue is very, very different. So with PLG, it's really focused across the user experience and around users acquiring other users. That user growth is really important, right? Getting as many people on the platform as possible to experience that value. Whereas with sales-led, it's really focused around the goal of closing deals, of winning deals and closing deals. And our marketing focus is much different too. Marketing with a PLG company is focused on getting that account actually created, whereas marketing is focused on generating leads for a sales approach company. Diving in, there are 3 different KPIs that are used very differently across PLG and sales-led companies. For PLG, we want users to acquire other users. Like I said, word of mouth is huge when it comes to PLG. So really making sure that we have ways for users to share and engage with other people who don't have accounts yet is how we get people coming back into the product on its own. Whereas acquisition in a sales-led company is actually very focused around generating leads, like we talked about earlier. From a monetization standpoint, making sure that we have self-serve options for people to swipe their credit card on their own, not talking to sales, versus that monetization is much different at sales-led, with actually closing contracts and getting in that sales funnel. And lastly, with retention. We want to make sure that people are habitually coming back into the product day after day, week after week. That type of retention is seen in a very small window of time. Usually you have 7-day retention, maybe 30-day retention. However, with sales-led, sometimes you don't even know if someone's retained until you go to renew their contract. And then you go, oh, they haven't been active in the platform for 6 months. And then maybe your success hosts these quarterly business reviews where they're showing them, again, the perceived value of the platform, but they may not actually be using it. So that retention piece is really different here between the two. And lastly, probably the funnest slide here, is why is PLG important in today's B2B selling environment? Not only do we have a competitive market that really kind of expanded as we went into a working remotely type of role, we also have tighter budgets. For example, as this economic downturn kind of persists, we have to really fight for a seat at the table to win these deals. But my favorite is actually that we have a new generation of buyers. Does anybody want to take a guess as to which generation holds the most purchasing power today? I heard Gen Z over here. Is that right? Gen Z? Yep. Anyone? Millennials? All about the same? What if I told you that millennials hold 60% of the purchasing power in today's B2B environment? Why is this important? Think about how millennials grew up on technology. They are used to self-serving these products on their own. They're used to learning about it on their own. If we are then requiring them to do a whole different way of trying software, it's really difficult for them. So this is why I think that PLG is the future, is specifically around this new buyer and how we can make it easier for them to get started in the platform on their own. So now that we've gone over what PLG looks like, we're going to talk about product marketing in a PLG company. There are subtle differences in this, but very important. And upon first glance, all of this may look pretty similar. So all product marketing has alignment, go-to-market strategy, we do launch, we do execution, right? But the way you do this in PLG very much differs from how you do it in a sales-led org. It really comes down to your target audience, your messaging, and your value props. In a PLG company, you're really focused around the individual user, right? And the individual user within a company is responsible for doing their job really effectively to contribute to the company goals, right? So that means that the messaging should be very simple and very focused on that pain point, with the value really being focused on how they do their job better or faster. This is very different than how we're talking to buyers. When we talk to buyers, we're talking to them as focused on the future. Here's the future state of your business with this software, right? All of our content is really thought leadership type of content. We're also targeting more revenue or maybe time savings or money savings within a company. Now, again, I'll reiterate the point. Both of these things should work in tandem, right? You should have PLG, you should have sales-led, they should marry into this beautiful child that is your company. But I progress. Doing your job better and faster is much more targeted to the individual user than having more revenue for the buyer. Very, very different how you're positioning these things. And then lastly, how does go-to-market strategy differ? Really comes back to the target audience. So establishing organic trust for the individual user is focused on delivering value organically. So this is through things like, for example, social, blog, even review sites is a great way for people to get engaged there. We also want to provide self-serve value. So for example, can they get started really easy? Are there templates? What does the personalized onboarding experience look like for them? And then lastly, really talking to marketing teams first and foremost. I know that in traditional kind of like the sales-led motion, product marketers are talking to sales. And not that that's not important, but the majority of what happens here is actually on the marketing team. And in order to deliver that constant organic trust and value all the time, we need to make sure that our marketing teams understand who our individual users are and what those use cases look like. And you can see that's very different from our sales-led go-to-market strategy, which is mostly focused on establishing market authority. This is like engaging with your analyst relations, maybe it's doing a report, generating leads, a lot of gated content involved, right? Not that free organic trust, that's gated content over there. And then executing with sales teams, enabling them on who the buyer personas are, maybe doing battle cards, kind of the things that we're normally used to in this environment. So we've gone over what PLG is and isn't. We've gone over what PMM's role in a PLG org looks like. Now let's talk about how to get a seat at the table. I love frameworks. I use frameworks as part of every single thing that I do. And this is the framework that I use time and time again when I'm trying to get a seat at the table. Number 1 is develop extreme ownership. 2, create visibility. And 3, establish a cadence with leadership. For developing extreme ownership, I know this is talked about a lot, but I think a lot of it gets missed, and I don't think it's very well executed on. And here's why. When we talk about establishing a strategy ownership, I think oftentimes people forget how much that needs to be repeated consistently with stakeholders. So for this piece, I really recommend having this sort of elevator pitch, if you will, where you say, here's who I am, here's my role at the company, and then most important part of your elevator pitch is actually how it ladders back up into the business. What result are you going to have? What business impact are you going to have by leading this product launch or by doing this new initiative in the company? And probably my favorite is define swim lanes. I think many of us in the room can probably agree that the swim lanes are very blurry between product marketing and, let's say, content or sales enablement or other, departments within the organization. So really making sure that we identify what things we are fully owning versus what things we're supporting on versus what things we need to approve, and making sure that those swim lanes are very much defined. And then lastly, alignment as a deliverable. How often can you think of times where you don't have enough time in the day to hop on meetings with, executives or with leadership and give them updates on what's happening and make sure that they're bought into whatever big decisions you're making. Yet, this is an important part of product marketing's role. So really making sure that you have this listed as a deliverable is really important to ensure the success of your ownership. Step 2 is create visibility. I'm not going to go directly into this. You're welcome to take a screenshot. This is my template step-by-step guide that I use at every company that I'm at. And it's basically to create this async channel. I love Slack. Create an async channel and create self-serve material within there, right? You can kind of like post banners to the top of your Slack channel. This can be your positioning and messaging docs. This can be your project tracker. Whatever is going to be relevant for people to self-serve that information with. And then make sure you're posting updates frequently here. You really want to make sure that on a weekly basis at least, you're keeping those stakeholders aligned and informed. This is by far, when I did a retro for all the previous launches that I do, this is the thing that people call out the most. Because stakeholders, and really the entire company, want to know what's happening. They want to be included. They want to know what's going on. But sometimes it's just too much to set meetings with all of these people all the time. So by having this async channel, you're able to kind of widen the gap and make sure everybody's included, even when you can't directly speak to them all the time. And then lastly, establish a cadence with leadership. This is the exact template that I use anytime I join a new company or anytime that I, let's say, take on a new project. This is the exact template that I send in Slack to leadership. And my goal is simple. Get 15 minutes on their calendar. That's it, just 15 minutes. And all I do here is reiterate that elevator pitch that I talked about earlier. Here's my name, here's my role, here's why I was brought here. Here's the role that I'm going to deliver on. This is the impact that's going to be had on the business. This is really important for leadership to visualize how they can work together with you. And then lastly, let's talk about how to prove success. Love frameworks, like I said. So this is my framework for proving success. One is to develop a hypothesis, then start the PMM PLG framework, and then do a cross-functional retrospective. Quick show of hands, who here, when you're developing a launch, actually uses a hypothesis before you get started? Love it. Yes. Okay. Few, but we got some good folks in here. Okay. Whoops. I love using hypothesis. I think this is the core to the cultural aspect of a PLG company. And this is kind of the framework that I use for each hypothesis that I develop. First is the goal. These goals should ladder back up into the mission of the company, and it should ladder back up into those North Star metrics that we have, right? So whether that be improve retention, maybe increased conversions, right? All of these things are laddering back up into those PLG goals. The second is focused on outcomes. What does success look like? What does failure look like, right? Establishing these things ahead of time. And then the why. Are we laddering this back up into the mission and vision of the company, right? This is very important, especially when talking with leadership. And then also, is this urgent? Why is this needed now? Make sure to push back on that a little bit because you may be able to buy yourself some more time. Once you've developed a hypothesis, then we want to start the PMM framework. I like to think of this in 3 easy steps: learn, create, and do. When you're learning about your users. Then after you learn about your users, you're creating, let's say, messaging and positioning docs. And then lastly, doing. You're executing, you're aligning, you're enabling, right? We should all be very familiar with this learn, create, do cycle. This is core to PMM. After we establish a hypothesis, and after we do our framework, and this product is now launched into the world, it's time for the most important step, which is doing a cross-functional retrospective. If you only left with one thing here today, it would be number 3, share your learnings. But I'll go over each one individually. Step 1 is implement a feedback survey. You can do this immediately after you've launched that product. Does not need to wait until KPIs. You ask your stakeholders, What went well? What didn't? Do you feel like this launch went well? Scale of 1 to 10, just kind of feel it out a little bit. What did you think about the positioning and messaging docs that I put together? Could they be improved, right? So all of these qualitative insights are really important. Step 2, gather KPIs, right? This sometimes can be done immediately. Usually you need a little bit more time to develop a kind of roadmap for what that looks like, right? An email, an hour after being sent, we really don't know what those KPIs are looking like. We have to wait a week, sometimes a month, depending on what's involved in that nurture cycle. But I think what's most important here out of the gathering KPIs is laddering it back up into the goals that we initially set. Quick show of hands. When you launch a product, do you report back on maybe impressions of a blog post or open rates of an email? Things like that. Raise a hand. Cool, about half of you. Quick show of hands. Is anybody able to tie that back into actual product adoption? I think I see 2 hands. Okay, great. As we develop our hypothesis, we want to really make sure that we're tying that back in to our goal, right? We talked earlier about a hypothesis. If our goal is to increase retention, how will we know if we increase retention? By showing we had 1,000 impressions on a blog post or 12% click-through rate on an email, right? Let me give you a hypothesis or a scenario. Let's say you have one email that has a 5% click-through rate, but only 2 people adopted the product, versus another email that only had a 1% conversion rate, but 100% of people who clicked on that adopted the product. Which one of those does better, right? If we're talking about laddering it back up to that hypothesis we established earlier, it's very clear that even though that 1% conversion rate doesn't look so hot as compared to the 5% conversion rate, it actually did perform better in terms of what we were looking for the outcome to be. So really important that we're tying it back into those goals. And then lastly, share your learnings. Notice I said share your learnings and not celebrate your wins. Hypotheses are all about proving and failing, proving and failing. If you set all your hypotheses and succeed with every single test you do, something is wrong. It's not possible, okay? So making sure that you're creating a culture where you're sharing your learnings and celebrating the learnings that you have so you can pivot and optimize and adopt is really the core cultural aspect of a PLG company. So now that we've gone through all of those things, I have a very fun exercise for us all. You'll know you're fluent in PLG when you can read this through and through. I know I've used a lot of acronyms so far. Does anyone feel brave enough to take a stab? Or even just shout out one thing you know in here. Customer acquisition cost, I heard. Yep, CAC, that's in the middle there. Lifetime value, yep, great. Product-led growth, also great. User-generated content, yep. So we got a few nuggets in there, I love it. Here's a sentence through and through. Unicorn product-led growth, business-to-business software as a service company. Organic growth with user-generated content and search engine optimization. No search engine marketing, AKA no paid. With network effects, less than a third customer acquisition cost over lifetime value. With 5% free-to-paid self-serve conversion rate and product-led sales go-to-market strategy. 85% closed-won deals via sales-assisted, product-qualified leads, hand raisers, and account-based marketing. Congrats, you're fluent in PLG now. If any of this was helpful or relevant to you, I also post about it weekly on LinkedIn, and this is the QR code there. Give me a follow and connect with me. Thanks, guys.
That's great, Madison. Thank you very much. I think we probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. And while we get Slido up, I do have one question for you. Mm-hmm. Do you see companies that practice both product-led growth and sales-led growth?
Yes, and I think a successful company is one that does both. Yeah, because in order to have kind of the marriage between the two, right? If you have a large enterprise company, they're really not able to self-serve. It can start by that, right? You can have a user who's like the champion of a product and you can grow and expand into this enterprise deal, but you need that sales-led motion for the larger accounts that PLG doesn't necessarily equate to immediately.
Yeah, so it's that land and expand model, correct?
Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
a lot of times, yeah. We see that quite a bit too in the SaaS side of things. So, I mean, one of the questions that is here is how do you transition from sales-led growth to product-led growth? Really tough.
Really tough, yeah. I would say you need leadership buy-in for this. It needs to be set at the executive level, the CEO, because it is a mindset difference, like we were talking about earlier. If the mindset is still focused on revenue before user, value and really the perceived value inside the product, you're not going to be able to make the transition. So really making sure that you have buy-in from that and that the entire company is on board for that cultural aspect of product experience being that focal point, then you can get buy-in and you can really make that happen.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Another one, great question. How do you visualize a non-UI product like APIs when you think about product-led growth? And then without a free sandbox, I mean, that's a tough one.
That's a tough one, yeah. I would say you can do kind of an in-between point, like I was kind of mentioning with the demo on a website. So APIs are useful for when they're actually implemented. So showing examples of that can be really helpful. And even self-serve API connection. I mean, Zapier is kind of meeting that somewhere in the middle, right? So making sure that you can provide value through a visualization if you can't go all the way.
All right, last one we'll take here. What does product-led growth look like when the SaaS products are very complex and require extensive implementation and data integration efforts to utilize?
Yeah, I like this question.
Good luck.
So I would say it depends. So PLG is really focused on SMB and mid-market. Again, for those large enterprise deals, right, you can't go in with PLG to an established 30,000 person company and try to roll that out immediately. So that's where kind of the marriage between sales-led and product-led come together. And I think that for anything that requires extensive implementation, you're going to need that like sales-led piece where you have a CSM do the implementation and onboarding process if you have a large team. If you don't have a large team, let's say you're a team of even 20 people, you should be able to self-serve that onboarding and make it easy for people to get started in your platform. There should be a way for you to do that at least fully, if not 80% of the way there.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of great insights in your presentation.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.